Saint Paul, also known as Paul the Apostle, was a Christian apostle considered one of the leaders of the first generation of Christians. He spread the teachings of Jesus in the first century and is counted among the most important figures of the apostolic age. He was a Greek-speaking Jew from Asia Minor. Although the exact date of his birth is unknown, scholars often infer that he was born about the same time as Jesus or a little later. If this calculation is correct, it is probable that Paul studied Torah in Jerusalem during the 3 years of Jesus' public life. Paul was converted to faith in Jesus Christ about 34 to 36 CE, and he died, probably in Rome, about 62 to 64 CE. Saint Paul, also known as Saul, ethnically was Jewish. He was born in a devout Jewish family belonging to the tribe of Benjamin. Both his parents were Roman citizens. It is safe to assume that Paul's earliest language was Koine Greek, the household language of all educated Roman citizens throughout the empire. He grew up in Jerusalem and was brought up by Rabbi Gamaliel, a leading authority in the Jewish religious establishment. During his early life, Saint Paul was a Pharisee, a group of Jewish people who administered the law. He also joined in persecuting the Christians in Jerusalem. This included taking part in the stoning of Saint Stephen, the first martyr of the church. In his childhood and youth, Paul learned how to work with his own hands. His trade, tent making, which he continued to practice after his conversion to Christianity, helps to explain important aspects of his apostleship. He could travel with a few leatherworking tools and set up shop anywhere. It is doubtful that his family was wealthy or aristocratic, but, since he found it noteworthy that he sometimes worked with his own hands, it may be assumed that he was not a common laborer. His letters are written in Koine, or Common Greek, rather than in the elegant literary Greek. Moreover, he knew how to dictate, and he could write with his own hand in large letters, though not in the small, neat letters of the professional scribe. Until about the midpoint of his life, Paul remained as a member of the Pharisees. Paul spent much of the first half of his life persecuting the nascent Christian movement, an activity to which he referred several times. Paul's motivations are unknown, but they seem not to have been connected to his Pharisaic interests. The chief persecutors of the Christian movement in Jerusalem were the high priest and his associates, who were Sadducees, and the Acts of the Apostles depicts the leading Pharisee, Gamaliel, as defending the Christians. It is possible that Paul believed that Jewish converts to the new movement were not sufficiently observant of the Jewish law, that Jewish converts mingled too freely with Gentile converts, thus associating themselves with idolatrous practices, or that the notion of a crucified Messiah was objectionable. The young Paul certainly would have rejected the view that Jesus had been raised after his death, not because he doubted resurrection as such but because he would not have believed that God chose to favor Jesus by raising him before the time of the judgment of the world. Whatever his reasons, Paul's persecutions probably involved traveling from synagogue to synagogue and urging the punishment of Jews who accepted Jesus as the Messiah. Disobedient members of synagogues were punished by some form of ostracism or by light flogging, which Paul himself later suffered at least 5 times, though he does not say when or where. According to Acts, Paul began his persecutions in Jerusalem, a view at odds with his assertion that he did not know any of the Jerusalem followers of Christ until well after his own conversion. Paul's conversion is narrated in Acts 9, 3-19, 22, 6-21, 26, 12-18, and Galatians 1, 12-16. According to the essential spirit of these sources, Paul was on his way to Damascus when he had the vision that changed his life. Paul underwent a supernatural experience, which convinced him that Jesus was the Messiah of Israel and that God had called Paul to preach the gospel to all men. The narrative adds that he was blinded and forced to fast for 3 days until a Christian named Ananias laid hands on him and restored his sight, after which he was baptized. The usual date assigned to this event is between 34 and 36 AD. Paul spent the next 3 years of his life in Damascus with the Christians. He then returned to Jerusalem and was accepted by Peter and the other Christians. Paul then went to his home city of Tarsus and spent about 6 years preaching in parts of Syria and Cilicia. After a final year spent at Antioch, he and Barnabas were commissioned by the church to go to the surrounding nations and preach the Christian message. During the next 15 years, Paul undertook 3 extensive journeys in the eastern Mediterranean region. At the time Paul undertook his travels, that part of the world was protected by the Pax Romana, that is the Roman administration and peace. Paul had no difficulty in traveling or in communicating. Throughout the eastern Mediterranean, a network of well-guarded and well-preserved roads, serviced by Roman garrisons, connected fortified and prosperous towns. A common language, Koine Greek, was spoken throughout the eastern Mediterranean and was used for all communications. Correspondence by mail was a daily and ordinary method of communication. Furthermore, sea lanes for commerce and for passenger traffic were open between Palestine, Turkey, Greece, Italy, North Africa, and the main Greek islands. Throughout the eastern Mediterranean, scattered but well-organized communities of Jews existed in all the principal localities. Between these Jewish communities and the central authority in Jerusalem, constant communication was maintained. The communities of Jews living outside Palestine depended upon the Palestinian authorities for the fixing of the Jewish calendar, the regulation of the Jewish year, the offering of sacrifices in the temple, and the general authentication of doctrines, scrolls, and teachers. Until the latter period of his life, Paul moved through these Jewish communities as a Jew. This fact has often been obscured by the later opposition between Paul and the Jews and between Christianity and Judaism. Only toward the end of his life was Paul not welcome in the synagogues of the Jewish communities. Christians in general were refused entry into synagogues only in the last 20 years of the 1st century. Paul's first journey, which began about 45 AD, took him through Cyprus and southeastern Turkey. He then returned to Antioch by the same path. On his second journey, Paul went overland through Turkey and then to mainland Greece, passing through Athens and returning to Palestine in the same year through Rhodes. He landed at Tyre on the shores of Palestine about 52 AD. During this second journey, Paul wrote his 2 letters to the Thessalonians. On his third journey, Paul departed from Antioch, again traveled across Turkey, visited Ephesus and Chios, and then proceeded through Macedonia to visit mainland Greece again. He returned home by sea from the southwest coast of Turkey to the Palestinian port of Tyre. During this third journey, Paul composed his letter to the Galatians, his 2 letters to the Corinthians, and his letter to the Romans. Between the beginning of his missionary journeys and his death, Paul wrote a number of letters that later became part of the Christian New Testament. Before his death, he composed a total of 13 letters. A 14th letter, the letter to the Hebrews, traditionally bearing Paul's name, is now generally considered to have been written by a disciple of Paul. Back in Jerusalem after his third missionary journey, Paul proposed a trip to Rome and Spain. During his stay, he was recognized by certain Asian Jews, who immediately attacked him as a renegade and troublemaker for the Jewish communities. In the ensuing melee, Paul was saved by the Roman civil authorities who intervened. Paul was arrested as the cause of the disturbance. As a Roman citizen, he was saved from assassination and then transferred to Roman coastal headquarters, Caesarea, where he was tried by the Roman procurator, Felix. To escape being sent back for trial in Jerusalem, where he would have received certain death, Paul used his right as a Roman citizen to be transferred to Rome for trial by Caesar. He arrived in Rome after a sea voyage in the spring of 60 AD. During the years of his captivity in Rome, he composed his letters to the Colossians, to the Ephesians, to the Philippians, to Philemon, to Timothy, and to Titus. Little is known of his subsequent life except that he possibly paid a visit to Spain before his death. He was martyred, according to all accounts, sometime in 66 or 67 AD in Rome. Saint Paul was an influential figure in the early development of Christianity. His writings and epistles form a key section of the New Testament. Saint Paul helped to codify and unify the direction of the emerging religion of Christianity. His feast day is on June 29 when he is honored with Saint Peter.